My mother-in-law blessed our rehearsal dinner, forks halted, and a reservation for two made my fiancée's secret second relationship hard to dodge, just as her father mentioned the non-refundable catering balance in front of everyone there. The reservation showed up before my future mother-in-law finished blessing us. That was the part nobody believes when I tell it back, because it sounds too clean, too timed, like somebody in the universe wanted the rehearsal dinner to break exactly where everyone could see it. But that is what happened. We were in the winery rehearsal hall, low lights, soft string music, all that expensive candlelit pretending that family peace can be purchased by place settings. My future mother-in-law had just lifted her glass and said something about commitment being a daily choosing, even when life gets loud, which already irritated me because my fiancé, Taryn, had been impossible to pin down for 3 straight weeks, and her mother kept translating every coldness as stress. Then one of the venue coordinators came over with a leather event folder and said, in the sweet, clipped voice of someone used to bridal emergencies, "I just need the signature on this rooming confirmation and the dinner layout revision." Taryn reached for it first, too fast. The coordinator, trying to help, opened it for her. The top sheet was ours. Head table adjustments, dietary swaps, one change seat because Taryn's cousin had broken up with her +1 48 hours earlier, and now everybody was pretending that was the crisis. But tucked behind that, clipped in from the attached lodge desk, was a reservation for 2 under Taryn's name. Friday check-in, 1 king room, 2 guests. Our wedding was Saturday. For 1 second, nobody said anything. Then I heard 3 forks stop against plates at different parts of the hall, and it made the silence feel mechanical, like the room had physically caught. Taryn said, "That isn't mine." But she said it while looking at the paper, not me. That mattered. Her mother leaned in instantly. "It's probably a duplicate hold from the room block." The coordinator's face changed in that horrible professional way where she realizes she has carried the wrong paper into the wrong family. "I'm sorry, I thought this packet all belonged together." Taryn took the folder and closed it too late. I had already seen enough. Her full name, Friday, 1 king, 2 guests, not our suite, not the bridal cabin. A completely separate booking at the attached lodge where out-of-town guests were staying. I said, "Reservation for 2. Taryn looked at me. "It's not what you think." That line always arrives too early when people are already guilty of something, even if the something is only lying by omission. Her mother gave a short laugh, the one she uses when she wants embarrassment to sound manageable. "There's your answer, logistics." Wedding places make clerical messes out of everything. I didn't even look at her. "Then why are there 2 guests?" The coordinator stood frozen at our table, holding the layout sheet like it might still rescue her. Around us, the rehearsal hall kept doing that awful thing big family events do when a problem blooms in public. Nobody fully stops talking, but everybody starts listening harder than they eat. Taryn lowered her voice. "Can we not do this here?" There it was. Not explanation, location. I should say now that yes, I was already primed. If someone wanted to argue later that I walked into rehearsal dinner carrying suspicion in my spine, they would not be wrong. Taryn had become slippery in ways that were hard to quote without sounding petty. Late replies. Weird overnight planning runs with no useful details afterward. The kind of affectionate overcorrection people use when they know their ordinary warmth has gone missing. I had not caught her with anything. I had simply started feeling like she had a private lane running parallel to the life she and I were still publicly building. The reservation only gave the room shape. Her father, who had been halfway through chewing when the paper surfaced, set down his fork and said, too casually, "If this is some back-end lodge issue, let them sort it. We've already paid the non-refundable catering balance. Not now, not calm down, not what is this? Money." That was his first instinct, also telling. The coordinator said, "I can take it back to the desk and have them recheck." Taryn answered before I could, "Please." I put my hand over the folder. "No." That changed the air again. Not because I slapped it down or raised my voice, just because I touched the paper in front of everyone and made it clear this was not going to be smoothed into a clerical anecdote before I even got to read it once properly. Taryn's mother said my name in that soft, reproachful tone she had been using on me for a year whenever I failed to perform gratitude at the correct volume. Claire. I looked at her. You were literally blessing us 30 seconds ago. Her smile tightened but did not fall. And I still am, which is why I'm telling you not to let venue confusion humiliate you. That would have helped if Taryn had not gone pale when she saw the details. I opened the folder fully. Reservation for 2. Friday, 4:10 p.m. Check-in. Late arrival note removed. 1 king. 2 guests. Lodge building C. Not our building, not our suite, not bridal overflow. Taryn said, I made that weeks ago. I looked up at her. For what? She swallowed. I was trying to solve a housing issue for someone. A housing issue. Her father cut in immediately. See, there you go. But he sounded relieved too early, like the shape of the excuse mattered more than whether it held. I asked, then why your name? Because it was easier. For who? For the booking. That's not an answer. The coordinator finally stepped back a little, which was smart. Nobody wants to be physically closest to a wedding table when the couple stops sounding like a couple and starts sounding like a deposition. Taryn's mother leaned in harder, not away, which is how I knew she had decided her role already. Not witness, manager. This does not mean anything romantic, she said. Interesting choice of word, given I hadn't used one yet. I said, no one said romantic. Her mouth flickered. That was one of the 3 little tells from her that night, and maybe I only noticed because I was looking for cracks in everyone by then. But still, she had gone to romantic before I had. Same way guilty people say, not an affair, when the room only knows there's a hotel. Taryn said, please, not in front of everybody. A server came by with another tray of wine and stopped so sharply one glass chimed against another. Soft shift. Hall noise, clink of stemware, candlelight, 20 people pretending not to watch the head table of a rehearsal dinner become a tribunal over a reservation for 2 under the bride's name. I said, Friday at 4:10. So, Friday at 4:10, you told me you were still with your aunt fixing centerpieces. Taryn looked at me. Her mother looked at Taryn. Her father looked at the paper. Nobody answered. That was when I knew the booking was not just embarrassing. It was connected to a timeline they had already rehearsed. The silence after I said the time did more damage than the reservation itself. Because a weird booking can still be clerical. A duplicate hold can still be a venue error. A bride can still be stupid with logistics and not disloyal. But the second a booking detail lines up against a sentence I remember hearing in real life, in my own kitchen, from the mouth of the woman I was supposed to marry the next day, the room has to choose whether this is confusion or concealment. Taryn chose fast. I went thereafter. Not a good answer, not because it was impossible, because it came too trimmed, too ready to plug the exact hole I'd just opened. You were still with your aunt at 4:10, I said. I said I was helping with centerpieces. At 4:10. Yes. And then I had to handle something else. Her mother stepped in immediately. This is what I meant. It's a wedding weekend. People are in 10 places at once. That would have played better if she had let Taryn finish a full sentence first. Instead, it sounded like she was trying to flatten the timeline before it got sharper. Her instinct wasn't to discover, it was to contain. I noticed that. Everybody at the table noticed it, even if they would later pretend they had been looking at bread baskets and not our faces. I said, who was the second guest? Taryn took a slow breath through her nose. A friend. There it was. The broadest possible answer, the one people give when the specific name would rearrange the room faster than they can survive. Her father picked up his water glass without drinking from it. If she booked a place for a friend, then that's the explanation. I looked at him. Then why isn't the friend's name on it? It's under hers because she made the booking. No, I said, that explains the payer, not the secrecy. He did not like that. I could see it in the way his shoulders changed. Less father of the bride now, more man hearing money and family reputation pulling against each other. The catering balance had already been mentioned once. That mattered because it meant he had positioned the dinner in financial terms before anybody even agreed what the damage was. Taryn said, there isn't secrecy. I almost laughed. There's a reservation for 2 attached to your name on wedding weekend. That doesn't automatically mean what you want it to mean. There it was. Same move guilty or cornered people always make. They don't deny the object, they object to the interpretation. Sometimes that's fair, sometimes it's the last safe lane. The problem was, Taryn had already spent weeks making me feel like any direct question about where she was would mark me as unstable. So now that I had a piece of paper instead of a feeling, her "what you want it to mean" line landed like insult on top of injury. A cousin at the far table dropped her eyes into her wine so aggressively it almost looked painful. A bridesmaid near the end of the head table kept her fork halfway raised and never took the bite. The room was not neutral anymore. It had gone from celebration to witness circle in under 2 minutes, and every sentence now carried audience weight, whether we liked it or not. The coordinator, still hovering because hospitality workers get trapped in family disasters more than anyone acknowledges, said carefully, "I can ask the lodge desk to confirm whether the guest was checked in." Taryn snapped, "No!" Too fast. That was the second bad turn. Because whatever moral argument she wanted later about me overreacting, a normal person wrongly tied to the wrong room would not panic at the offer of desk confirmation. Desk confirmation would be salvation. Taryn reacted like confirmation itself was the danger. Her mother heard it too, because she pivoted instantly. "We do not need hotel staff in our personal business." Interesting, not "we don't need this if it's a clerical issue." Personal business. Again, the language arrived before the truth was settled, which told me more than either of them meant it to. I looked at Taryn. "Who?" She stared back. "A friend from out of town." "Name?" "Why?" "Because apparently we're down to that." Her jaw tightened. "You are doing this because you're angry, not because you're confused." That stung because it was partly true. I was angry. I was also confused. The two are not mutually exclusive, and people love pretending anger invalidates the underlying question, when really, it just means the question finally found a body. I said, "You booked a king room for 2 on Friday." It was the only room left in that building. That one almost helped. Almost. Real enough to sound plausible. Useless enough to fix nothing. Plenty of people take weird rooms during wedding weekends because properties are overbooked and the front desk doesn't care about your aesthetics. But again, if the whole thing were logistics, why was every explanation arriving only after I named the exact problem? Her father said, "This can wait until after dinner." No. That was the moment I understood he had become more dangerous to me than Taryn for the next few hours. Not because he had lied first, because he controlled the most immediate consequence. Money, vendor approvals, release of the final catering charge. Which version of tonight got to become tomorrow's family story? Fathers with non-refundable balances do not need to love the bride to dominate the room. They only need everyone to know who paid what. I said, "You already said the no." He looked at me. "Because it matters. More than why your daughter has a reservation for 2. His expression changed. Not rage, calculation. It matters that this dinner not become something we can't pull back from because people are emotional. There it was. Not truth. Pullback. Optics. That was his lane. Family chooses sides before facts are settled, and he was already choosing the side that best protected the amount already wired to the venue. Taryn's mother, to my surprise, did not fully back him right away. She looked at the reservation again, then at Taryn, then said too softly, "Who is the friend?" That made everything worse. Because the first person who had tried to bless the room back into order had now accidentally joined me on the question, which meant her earlier defense started reading less like confidence and more like panic. And when the person defending the couple starts making it worse, the room turns mean in a very specific way, not outwardly, but inwardly. People stop granting benefit. They start cataloguing. Taryn said, "Mum," not an answer, a warning. Her mother held her gaze. "Who?" Taryn looked at me then, and I saw something that had been missing from her all evening. Not guilt exactly, but exhaustion at the shrinking options. If someone wanted to argue later that she was cornered more than unfaithful, I wouldn't be able to dismiss it entirely. Wedding weekends distort everything. Families magnify, schedules blur, and bad decisions that might have died quietly on an ordinary Tuesday become public threats under candlelight. I know that. I knew it even while I sat there hating her. But she still had not given me a name. A friend who needed somewhere to stay, she said. You said that, I replied. Different words, same emptiness. The server with the wine tray finally moved away, leaving the whole table abruptly underlit by the candles again. Soft shift, less service noise, more human silence. Somewhere near the back, someone laughed too loudly at some unrelated conversation and then stopped as soon as they realized how it sounded. I put one finger on the reservation line. Friday, 4:10, Lodge Building C, 1 king, 2 guests. Tell me who needed that. Taryn's father said, Claire. I didn't look at him. Taryn's mother did. And that was when I knew the in-law split had already started, because she said flatly and in front of everyone, let her answer. Taryn didn't. Not right away. She just stared at the paper like, maybe, if she held still long enough, it would turn back into a venue mistake. Then her phone buzzed on the table beside her water glass. Screen lit up. One message preview. You still coming? No name visible, just the line. And Taryn grabbed for the phone so fast she knocked her fork onto the plate. The fork hit the plate hard enough that 3 people at the next table looked over before they could stop themselves. That little metal sound did more than the message preview, honestly, because a text can still be explained, a preview can still be misread. But the speed with which Taryn lunged for the phone told the whole table there was something on that screen she could not afford to let sit there for even 1 extra second in front of me. Her parents, the bridal party, and a venue coordinator who was still pretending to be furniture. Her mother said, Taryn. Just her name. No softness now. Taryn flipped the phone over. Too late. We had all seen the line, and no, it did not name a lover. No, it did not say room number or anything cartoonishly definitive. That was part of what made it so awful. It was ordinary enough to survive, intimate enough to stain. You still coming is not explicit. It is worse sometimes. It assumes an existing plan. It assumes access. It assumes the sender expected her to leave this room and arrive somewhere else. Her father leaned back in his chair like distance itself might keep his shirt clean. Everybody gets texts. I almost laughed. During a question about a reservation for 2. That proves nothing. No, I said. It proves timing. Taryn looked at me with the kind of cold desperation that only shows up when someone knows the room has started building its own story and is trying to get ahead of it without telling the whole truth. It was from a vendor. That answer might have helped if she had said it before she dove for the phone like it was going to explode. Her mother said, Show us. Taryn's eyes widened. Tiny. Real. Mum. Show us. Again, not my question this time. Her mother's. That was the shift. The person who had started the evening by blessing the couple and calming the room had now become part of the pressure instead of the shield, not because she believed me fully, because she had begun to understand that if she kept defending the wrong version in front of this many witnesses, the dinner would take her down with it. Taryn said, No. There it was again. Not explanation. Refusal. If anyone at that table had still been trying to give her full benefit, that second no ended it. The hotel room might have been logistics. The king bed might have been availability. The 2 guests might have been convenience. A text saying you still coming might even have come from a florist or a coordinator if the world were feeling especially malicious. But refusal layered over refusal is how innocent details rot into pattern. Her father said, Sharper now. This is done. Interesting. Not answered. Done. I looked at him. You think saying that changes the booking? I think humiliating my daughter in front of the caterer and half our guests solves exactly nothing. There it is. What? You keep speaking. Like. The problem is public. His face hardened. Because public problems cost money. And there it was again, plainer than before. Not daughter first. Not truth first. Money. Contract. Catering. The non-refundable balance wasn't an aside. It was his entire moral architecture for the evening. Whatever version of events preserved, the least financial fallout would automatically become the most reasonable one to him. That made him more dangerous than Taryn in that moment, because Taryn could only hurt me with what she'd already done. Her father could still decide how much of the family aligned around it tomorrow morning. I said, "So if this were happening privately, would it matter more?" He opened his mouth, stopped, and then said the most revealing thing he'd said all night. "If this were private, we'd still have options." Options, not answers. The venue coordinator, still trapped at the edge of our table like an unlucky ghost, said carefully, "I can return later." No one acknowledged her. Taryn finally spoke, voice low and clipped. "The text is from a person staying in the room because I was trying to solve a problem, and now everybody's making it disgusting. That landed because it was almost plausible enough to want. Almost. Then who?" I asked again. She swallowed. "Someone from my old college friend group." "Name." "Why do you need the name?" "Because your fiancé asking who you booked a room for on wedding weekend is a normal question. You don't know them. Try me." She looked down at the phone again, which was still face down beside her glass like an extra plate nobody wanted claimed. Around us, the rehearsal dinner had fully changed species. It was no longer an event with a problem. It was a room arranged around whether one woman could keep a half-built explanation standing while her parents split into two incompatible instincts. Protect the money or protect the story. Her mother leaned toward her. "If it's harmless, say the name." Taryn did not answer. That was when I started doubting not just her, but myself, in a different way. Because part of me could feel how cornered she was, and part of me wondered whether I was helping the room become crueler than it needed to be. Maybe there really was some stranded old friend, some stupid last-minute wedding weekend housing problem she had tried to solve under her own name because family optics and hospitality pressure make people do dumb things. Maybe the text preview was exactly what she said. A vendor. A guest. A room issue made hideous by timing. But then why no name? Why the dive for the phone? Why the panic every time hotel staff got too close to confirming anything? I said, "Were you planning to go there tonight?" That cut through everything. Even the clink of the kitchen doors in back seemed to stop mattering for a second. Taryn looked up slowly. "What?" "The text says you still coming." "It does not say where." "No, it doesn't need to." Her father pushed back his chair a few inches. That subtle movement told me he was now considering whether physically ending the dinner might be cheaper than letting the words keep landing. His mother saw it too and said, without looking at him, "Sit." He froze. That was another new thing, the split widening. Not loudly, not theatrically, but enough. Father pulling toward control through money. Mother pulling toward control through truth. Maybe because she could no longer survive on the first line she'd chosen. Taryn said, "I was not going there tonight." "Then what were you still coming to?" No answer. I leaned back, not because I was calmer, but because I understood something useful. The less I moved, the more frantic everyone else looked. If I got loud now, I would become the event. If I stayed precise, they had to live inside what they'd already offered. Soft shift. Same hall, but the room had gone quieter at the edges. People had stopped pretending to eat. A bridesmaid near the centerpiece candles was now openly staring at her bread plate because it was the only surface left that didn't accuse anybody. Taryn's mother said, "Did you tell her this room existed?" Taryn said, "No." "At least that's clear," I said. She looked at me with sudden heat. "You are enjoying this." That bothered me because it touched the ugliest part of public betrayal. Sometimes when the clue finally surfaces, there is relief in no longer being the only one who feels crazy. Relief can look like satisfaction if you're not careful. I knew that. I also knew I wasn't enjoying any of it, but I was past protecting her from the shape of the thing. I said, "No, I'm just not helping you name it less." Her father stood up then. "Enough." His mother said, "Sit down." He didn't. He looked at the coordinator, then at the folder, then at the wine glasses, and finally at me. You need to think very carefully about whether destroying this weekend over an arguable booking is worth the money already committed. There it was, straight. The threat, or close enough to one. Not if you're wrong, not if there's an explanation, if you destroy this weekend. Meaning the cost itself had now been assigned to me. And before I could answer him, Taryn made it worse. She said, too low for anyone not paying full attention, "Dad, stop making it about the balance." Which meant she knew exactly why he was doing it. And exactly what the balance still controlled. That sentence changed the room more than the reservation had. Not because it was louder, because it stripped the pretense of her father's position in one move. Dad, stop making it about the balance meant he was making it about the balance, had been from the first mention, and Taryn knew it well enough to say it without thinking, which meant the money had not floated into the dinner accidentally. It had been sitting there all night as a pressure point, ready to be used if the booking ever became inconvenient enough. Her father looked at her like she had betrayed him too. Interesting, I thought. Welcome to the table. He said, I'm making it about what is real. I almost smiled. Which is the catering bill? He turned to me. Which is the event your families are in the middle of paying for? No, I said. The event we were in the middle of paying for. That landed harder than I expected, because it shifted the math publicly. I was not just the bride at the wrong end of a cheating-shaped dinner. I was the person with money inside the machine too. Not theoretical heartbreak, actual vendor exposure. That matters at weddings more than people like to admit. The second cost becomes mutual. The family loses the ability to talk about grace like it's free. Taryn's mother said quietly, "No one is denying the money." Her husband snapped, "Then stop helping her light it." There it was, the loyalty split out loud. Not a dramatic scream, not glass-breaking family theatre. Just one sharp sentence that told everybody at the head table that the in-law front had officially cracked. Her mother was no longer on Taryn's side alone. Her father was no longer on Truth's side at all, assuming he ever had been. He was on salvage. Taryn sat very still. That bothered me more than if she'd cried. Stillness meant calculation now, not grief. She had stopped trying to win the room and started trying to survive its version of her. I knew that look because I'd worn it before in other contexts, meetings, family arguments, the kind of moment where one wrong sentence becomes the official story forever. I made the first clean choice of the dinner then. I picked up the reservation and slid it out of the folder completely. Not snatched, not waved. Just removed from the event packet so it could no longer hide among layout changes and meal counts. The coordinator inhaled softly. Tiny sound. That alone told me how much she wished she were anywhere else in the building. I said, Building C, 1 king, Friday 4:10, 2 guests. If this is not what it looks like, then let's stop talking about my tone and your father's money and answer one thing directly. Who is the second guest? Taryn rubbed her thumb against the stem of her water glass. A friend. Same answer. Same emptiness. No. What do you mean no? I mean you already used that word and it's dead. Her mother actually closed her eyes for a second. Her father looked like he might leave the table altogether, which would have been useful if I wanted to make him look worse, and disastrous if I wanted anything resolved before dessert service. Not that dessert mattered anymore. The hall had crossed into that eerie public humiliation phase, where every server moved more quietly and every guest suddenly knew exactly how interesting their mashed potatoes were. Taryn said, "You are trying to force this into the ugliest version." That bothered me because it was partly true. I was forcing, not the facts, the language. There's a difference, but not a pretty one. I needed the words pinned because everybody around me was living off blur. Blur is how second relationships survive in respectable families. Blur, timing, stress, hospitality. Somebody needed somewhere to stay. By the time anyone admits the emotional reality, the social one is already set. I said, then give me a better version with a name in it. She looked at the phone again. That did it for me. Not because the message proved a lover. It didn't, but because she kept orbiting the screen and refusing the simplest possible repair. Names fix innocuous things. Anonymous logistics do not need this much protection. Her mother said, Taryn. Her father said, don't. I looked at him. Interesting. He glared at me. What? You'd rather she keep the name hidden than clear the room. She doesn't owe this crowd. This crowd includes the woman she's marrying. he actually stood again. And this crowd includes the people who fronted the non-refundable balance you seem determined to burn down over an unverified assumption. There it was. No more subtext. Burn down. My fault. My action. Not the room. Not the booking. Not his daughter's refusal to say a name. The destruction had already been assigned to me. The trouble was, I could hear how that would sound later too. Not entirely unfair. If I kept driving this in public, I would indeed be the one making tonight unrecoverable. That is the trap with wedding betrayals. The person who forces clarity often gets framed as the one who ruined the event, because the event still had money and floral arrangements and aging relatives sitting inside it, all of whom become character witnesses for atmosphere instead of truth. I said, "You keep using money as if it's neutral." "It's not neutral, it's binding." Exactly. That was the most honest thing he'd said all evening. Soft shift, not just romance pressure now, financial pressure channel fully open. The room didn't get kinder once the money came in. It got colder. People always assume family scandal is emotional until they remember deposits. Once a balance is on the table, morality becomes negotiable faster than anyone wants to admit. Taryn finally said, "I was handling something that would have become a bigger mess if I'd told you too early." That sentence almost made me throw the water glass. Not because it was dramatic, because it was the first thing she'd said all night that sounded like the truth, and it was still crooked. Too early. Yes. So there was something to tell. "I just said that." Her father said, "Taryn, stop." Her mother said, "No, let her." Again, split widening. I asked, "Bigger mess for who?" She looked at me, and for the first time since the reservation surfaced, she sounded less polished than tired. For everyone. Not enough. But human enough to make me hate her a little less and the room a little more. Because if that was true, then she had spent weeks deciding not whether to lie, but when I was allowed to know enough. That kind of management is its own form of infidelity. Not body betrayal, maybe. Not always. But loyalty, betrayal, absolutely. She had been running a second lane parallel to our wedding, and the damage was not only the room or the possible second person. It was the fact that I was not in charge of my own information. I said very evenly, "Did you plan to go there tomorrow?" "No." "Tonight?" "No." "Then who is texting you asking if you're still coming?" She swallowed. The hall felt microscopic. Her father said, "We are not doing this." Her mother snapped, "We already are." That might have been the first sentence from either of them I respected all night. Taryn looked from one parent to the other, and I could see the exact moment she realized the family machine was no longer coordinated enough to save her. No united front, no single story. Just parents pulling in different directions while a room of guests quietly assembled moral rankings around candlelight. She picked up the phone, turned it face down harder than before, and said the words that finally made me understand the reservation wasn't just bad optics. "I can't say the name with your father standing here." That line silenced even her father. Not because it named anyone, because it told the whole table the name itself carried a category of damage that depended on who was listening. You don't say "I can't say the name with your father standing here" unless the name changes more than the room. It changes money, loyalty, maybe who gets protected once the dinner ends, and the guests go back to their hotel rooms. Her father went pale first, then angry. That order mattered. "What does that mean?" he asked. Taryn pressed her lips together and looked at the reservation instead of him. "Not me, him." Her mother said very quietly, "Taryn." I stayed still. That was the only useful thing left to me by then. If I lunged at the sentence, if I filled in the blank too fast, I would become exactly what her father wanted me to be. The bride who heard one half line and torched an entire wedding weekend over her own imagination. No, let them hear it. Let them sit in the architecture of what she had just admitted. Her father said my name instead. "Claire, whatever story you think you're constructing." I cut him off. "I'm not the one who said it." That landed. The coordinator at our table took one small step backward, clutching the seating revision sheet against her chest like a shield. One of the groomsmen further down the head table had stopped even pretending to eat and was looking at the candle between us like he could burn himself into another timeline if he stared hard enough. The room had gone from awkward to interpretive. Everyone was assigning meaning. Nobody wanted to be first. Taryn's mother leaned toward her. "Say it plainly." Taryn shook her head once, tiny, defeated more than resistant. "Not here." That should have sounded like delay again. It didn't. Not this time. This time it sounded like triage, which almost made it worse, because triage implies a real injury, and only a question of where you're allowed to treat it. Her father pushed his chair back. "I'm not sitting through this." "There it is," I said. He turned on me. "What? You leaving before the answer?" "I'm leaving before this turns into something slanderous." Interesting word. "Slanderous," I repeated. "Yes. So you already know the name could sound bad." His face hardened. "I know enough to hear when people are cornered into saying whatever ends the humiliation." That would have been a decent line from a father protecting a falsely accused daughter if he had not spent the entire dinner talking about the catering balance like it was a moral compass. By then, every sentence from him sounded priced. I said, "Then sit and hear the part she's avoiding." He looked at Taryn. Not at me, not at his wife, at his daughter. And for the first time all evening, he looked uncertain instead of controlling. That uncertainty told me more than any denial would have. He did not know everything. He knew enough to fear the wrong answer. Taryn said, "Dad, please." He stopped moving. There it was, the family pressure, fully visible now. He wanted out because staying meant he might hear a name that made the money leverage impossible to use cleanly. Her mother wanted the name because without it, she could no longer defend her daughter without feeling ridiculous. Taryn wanted the name contained because once it was public, there would be no way to roll it back into stress or logistics, or someone needed a place to stay. And me? I wanted the name because names are the only cure for blur, not because they bring peace, because they stop everybody else from doing character work on your instincts. Soft shift. The string music had restarted somewhere in the hall, low and absurd, and the kitchen doors were swinging in the back as staff tried to keep service moving. Wedding event on one track, disintegration on another. That's how expensive betrayals work. The venue keeps going. Human beings break beside the appetizer plates. I said, "Is it someone I know?" Taryn closed her eyes for a second. "Yes." Her father sat back down. That reaction told me almost everything about him, not the content, the priority. If the name touched known territory, if it was not a random stranded friend from out of town, then leaving the table became riskier than staying. He needed to know what kind of disaster he was financing. I asked, "From work?" "No." "From your family?" "No." "From the wedding?" Another pause. "Add adjacent." I laughed once, quietly, and every person at the table heard the bitterness in it, whether they wanted to or not. Adjacent. People love words like that when they want proximity without liability. Her mother said, "Stop doing this." I looked at her. Doing what? Making her bleed one word at a time. That almost moved me. Almost. Because it was the first defense from her all night that sounded maternal instead of strategic. But it was still too late, and it still centered Taryn's suffering over mine. I said, "She booked a king room for 2 under her name on our wedding weekend." "I know." "And she won't say who." "I know." That line between us just sat there. 2 women who understood the shape of the injury and differed only on what was still socially tolerable to ask for in public. If someone later argued that I forced the room past dignity, they wouldn't be fully wrong. If someone argued dignity had already been removed the moment the reservation surfaced and the message preview lit up, they'd be right too. Her father said, "If this person is not who you think, then you are creating irreversible harm." I looked at him. That threat would work better if you hadn't already tried to price the scene. He actually flinched at that. Not much. Enough. Taryn picked up her water glass, then set it down untouched. Her hands were steady now, too steady. That bothered me, because steadiness at that stage usually means someone has stopped hoping to be believed and started choosing what version of the loss they can survive. She said, "It's someone from the shuttle overflow list." A lie. Not because I could prove it instantly, but because it came too polished, too shaped to answer the exact direction I had pressed. Shuttle overflow lists sounded like venue language, like something borrowed from the coordinators folder and repurposed as camouflage. Even the coordinator's eyes flicked up at it. I said, "Name." Taryn looked at me with something almost like hate, or maybe just fatigue at being denied the softened story she had probably hoped would last until after the ceremony. "Why do you need me to say it here?" "Because if the answer were harmless, you'd already have used it." That was cruel. Also true enough that no one contradicted it. Her father's voice dropped. "Claire, think carefully about whether you actually want a public answer." There it was again. Not "don't accuse my daughter falsely," not "wait until later." Want. As if this were appetite, not injury. As if my need for the name was vanity, rather than the direct consequence of being handed half a reservation and a text preview in front of 50 people. I said, I wanted a private life. His mouth tightened. Taryn's mother turned to her. "Tell her." And that was the moment Taryn made the choice I think she had been resisting since the folder opened. Not to tell the whole truth. To tell enough that the room would shift permanently, whether it believed me or not. She looked at me and said, "It's for Maren." My brain took a second to catch up because the name did not belong to a stranger. Maren was the woman handling our welcome bags and late shuttle roster. Not family. Not vendor, exactly. Wedding adjacent, yes. Around us all week, yes. Close enough to the logistics to vanish in and out of our schedule without raising flags, yes. And then, because the room still needed one more blow, Taryn added, "She's not just on the shuttle list." That sentence was the closest thing to a confession anyone gave all night. Not clean enough to satisfy a court, more than enough to ruin a rehearsal dinner. She's not just on the shuttle list. Nobody moved for a second after Taryn said it. Even her father, who had spent the entire evening trying to convert disaster into catering math, just sat there with his hand flat beside his plate, like he no longer trusted himself not to knock something over if he reached for the water. Maren. Of course it was someone I knew. Of course it was someone close enough to hide inside wedding logistics. Not a random old friend from out of town, not an invented guest needing a favor. Someone carrying welcome bags, late guest texts, shuttle timing, all the little invisible acts that let a wedding weekend function while the couple is too busy being looked at. And because it was Maren, the room immediately reread everything. Her long hours with Taryn that week, the little private huddles over seating printouts, the one time I walked into the tasting room and both of them went too quiet too quickly. Not evidence, never the clean evidence people fantasize about. Worse, context, reanimating at speed, in front of witnesses. I said very evenly, "What does that mean?" Taryn looked down at the phone again, not because it could help her now, but because people look at objects when faces become too expensive. "It means I've been trying to keep a situation from detonating into this." I almost laughed. "This?" "Yes." "You mean your secret second relationship?" Her father said, "Enough." Her mother said, "No." There it was one last time. The split, fully open now. He still wanted the room closed before the money and family story got any uglier. She had crossed past denial and into the far more painful territory of wanting the truth because not wanting it would make her look ridiculous. Neither of them were on my side exactly. That was the cruelty of in-law fractures. They were choosing the version of themselves they could live with tomorrow, not me. Taryn said, "Do not call it that." "Then name it better." She was helping. With a king room for two. She needed somewhere private. Why? Silence. That was the whole shape in miniature. Every time I pushed toward plain language, I got context without a spine. Every answer implied intimacy, and then ran from the word for it. That is what made the whole thing so humiliating. If Taryn had just said, "Yes, I betrayed you," maybe the room could have organized around a single grief. Instead, we were stuck in the ugliest category. Enough to understand, not enough to cleanly close. Her mother asked the question I would have asked next anyway. Private for what? Taryn shut her eyes for a second. Because she was deciding whether she was going to leave town after the wedding. That answer landed strangely. Not because it solved anything, because it almost sounded compassionate. Human, potentially true, and that made it more dangerous, not less. People forgive private tenderness faster than they forgive planned deceit. If Taryn could frame the whole thing as emotional rescue under pressure, some percentage of the room would start helping her before I even got to decide whether I believed her. I said, "And you were going to meet her there?" "No." The answer came fast enough that for one stupid instant I almost wanted to believe it. Then I remembered the text, "You still coming?" And the room remembered it with me. I said, "Then what was the message?" Taryn's mouth flattened. She wanted to know if I was still coming to talk. Where? No answer. Her father spoke first. "This is exactly why none of this should have been said at dinner." I turned to him. "Your daughter booked a room for two with another woman on wedding weekend." He flinched at the gender more than the betrayal. Interesting and bleak. That changed the social air in the hall again, not louder, sharper. Because now the in-law split had another layer. Not only was there a reservation for two, not only had Taryn concealed it, but the second guest wasn't a faceless man her father could silently rank against deposits and damage control calls. It was a woman close enough to the wedding to move in and out of logistics unnoticed. That made the whole thing harder to dismiss, and harder, perhaps, for him to narrate back home without confronting what kind of relationship it might actually have been. Taryn said, "It's not what you're doing with it." That line had nearly run out of life. I said, "Then what were you doing with her?" Her mother closed her eyes. Her father stared at the tablecloth. The coordinator at the edge of the table now looked openly trapped and miserable, which at least felt honest. Taryn looked at me. "I was trying to decide something before I married you." There it was. Not a body confession, not a hotel confession, worse in some ways. She had built a private lane with Marin, substantial enough to require a separate room, enough to require a hidden decision, enough to run parallel to our wedding while she still stood beside me for tastings and vows, practice, and family blessings. That was the betrayal. Not maybe. Fully. Soft shift. The room did not recover from that line. People at the far tables stopped pretending entirely. Nobody was eating now. The rehearsal dinner had transformed from a celebration with a problem into a room trying to understand whether the wedding still existed in the form it had arrived in. I asked, "Decide what?" She did not answer. And honestly, she didn't need to. Stay, leave, choose me, choose Marin, choose the life already moving under the life I thought we were living. The specifics mattered less than the fact that the decision was alive at all, and alive enough to require concealment. Her father said, very low, "Taryn." For the first time that night, he sounded less like a financier and more like a man realizing the balance he'd been protecting might be attached to a ceremony his daughter no longer fully believed in. That was his reversal, I think, quiet and ugly, not toward me, away from her certainty. Her mother looked at him and knew it too. I made the second real choice of the dinner then. I slid the reservation back into the folder, closed it, and handed it to the coordinator. Not to end the matter. To remove the venue from the intimacy of it. I didn't need the paper in my hand anymore. The damage had moved past the object. The coordinator took it like I was handing her a lit candle. Taryn said, "Claire." I looked at her. "Don't do this here." I almost smiled. Not kindly, just from sheer exhaustion at the repetition. "We passed here a while ago." Her father said, "If you walk out now, there are consequences you can't reverse." There it was, still money, still event, still his native language, even with the rest of the truth now sitting at the table beside him. I answered him without taking my eyes off Taryn. "You keep saying that like the reversible thing was for her to book a room for two and decide whether to marry me in private." That shut him up. Taryn's mother put both hands flat on the table and said, to no one and everyone, "The dinner is over." It wasn't, technically. Staff were still there, candles still burned, the mains had barely been touched. But socially, yes, she was right. Whatever happened tomorrow, the rehearsal dinner had ceased to be rehearsal for anything stable. Taryn looked wrecked suddenly, not caught in a theatrical way, just tired and human and late, too late. "I didn't know how to stop it," she said. That was probably true, also useless. I stood up. No rush, no glass thrown, no speech. The room followed the movement anyway, because standing is how you tell a family you are done helping them pretend the scene still belongs to them. "Claire," Taryn said again. "What?" Her eyes were wet now, finally, but I didn't trust tears that arrived only after language did. I did love you. Did. Not do. That mattered. I nodded once. It was the only acknowledgement I had left. Her father looked like he wanted to say something about the balance again, and knew he would sound monstrous if he did. Her mother looked like she had aged 5 years in 20 minutes. The bridesmaids kept staring at anything except the center of the table. The groomsman near the candles finally drank the wine he'd been holding, untouched since the booking surfaced. I picked up my bag from under the chair and walked out of the winery hall without touching Taryn, without answering the next time she said my name, and without offering her family a version of the ending they could manage. By midnight, her father had texted once. "We need to discuss vendor obligations before morning. Not 'Are you okay?' Not 'I'm sorry.' Obligations." Her mother texted separately. I did not know. Maybe that was true. Maybe she had only known enough to try to smooth and bless and over-defend until the room finally outgrew her first instinct. That is what quiet reversal looks like, I guess. Not loyalty to me, just the death of loyalty to the lie. Taryn texted 3 times. The first said, "I never meant to humiliate you." The second said, "Maren is gone." The third said, "Please don't decide while angry." I stared at all 3 from a guest room 2 buildings away from the one in her reservation. That part felt almost comic in its cruelty. Same property, different room, same wedding weekend, different reality. I never got the clean closure people always want from stories like this. No perfect admission, no diagram with arrows. No single sentence where Taryn said, "Yes, I had a second relationship. Yes, I booked the room to be with her. Yes, I meant to choose in secret and then marry you if I could still pull myself back." What I got was worse and truer. A reservation, a text, a woman adjacent to the wedding, a fiancé deciding something in private she was supposed to have already decided with me, and a room full of family splitting around money, dignity, and denial in real time. By morning, the social shape had changed, even if the legal one hadn't. Her mother was no longer protecting the booking. Her father was no longer talking like the balance could save the weekend. And I was no longer a bride being asked to trust the word stress when the word choice had already moved to secret and 2 guests and you still coming. That was the shift. Not clean closure, just enough truth to make everyone stand in different places than they had at sunset.